Welcome to Changing the Conversation. This podcast explores the mix of diversity, culture and tech innovations in our industry. Join us as we sit down with trailblazers, thought leaders and innovators who are reshaping the landscape of insurance, bringing you stories that redefine the narrative. We are your guide to the evolving landscape of insurance. This is Changing the Conversation, brought to you by Mackay.
Welcome to Changing the Conversation, guys. I'm really happy to have you both here talking about sustainability. And I'm hoping to learn a lot from you because you guys know a whole lot more than I do. So just before we jump in, do you want to introduce yourselves? Gillie, would you like to go first?
Yes, my name is Gillie Fairbrother. I'm ESG lead, so sustainability and broader sort of ESG topics at Davies Group, and we are a professional services business to the insurance industry.
Amazing. And Mike, tell us about you.
Yeah, sure. So, Mike Wrathall, I'm an independent consultant working across sustainability and digital. So my background is in digital transformation and sustainability strategy. I come from Monitor Deloitte's sustainability and climate strategy team and specialise in things like climate tech and corporate sustainability strategy. And really excited to be here talking about the insurance industry today.
I'm quite excited because I think there's a lot of buzzwords that go around, and I had a good conversation with somebody recently who said, yeah, but what is it and how do we do it as a small firm? So I'm quite interested to really get to the nitty gritty of it. Let's just start with what the main challenges are in getting the insurance industry to adopt more sustainable practices. Gillie, what have you found in your experience?
Yeah, and I think I'll probably respond to that, in relation to the comment you just made about people saying, what is it? And I think in order to figure out what your challenges are, you need to find out what your exposure is, right? Because we're a professional services firm, but we provide services across the scope of insurance, whether that be, managing agents for syndicates, thinking about massive projects they're insuring, such as, oil and coal and gas. But then you've got to think about, you just mentioned smaller companies. Maybe you're a service provider looking at doing, commercial or private drying after there's been a flood. I think figuring out what your problems are or how you figure out what it is, and that would be the first step. Mike, I don't know if you had anything to add to that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, it's a really difficult one in terms of those smaller firms because the insurance industry as a whole has a massive role to play in sustainability. It's an investor. It's, one of the biggest investors groups in the world. It's an enabler of business. So whether you're an oil rig or a new wind farm, you pretty much need insurance to get that project off the ground. And so what the insurance industry chooses to insure is what happens effectively. So if the industry moves away from insuring so-called dirty economy things over a period of time and moves towards insuring new areas that are breaking ground, it can really enable those new areas, new climate technologies to get off the ground, and it can help phase out the other areas. It also has to look at its own operations. So some of our biggest insurers are global firms. They have a material footprint, even though you think of them as a professional services firm. They're not drilling for oil, they're not manufacturing things. They still have a footprint, so they've got to look at that. And then they have an opportunity. They serve the business community and customers, and so they can use policy terms to behaviourally nudge those customers in the right direction. So whether that's ratcheting premiums up and down based on good behaviours or things like that, the insurance industry has a huge role to play. In terms of the challenges, I think for smaller firms, it's working out where to play. They won't have a massive footprint themselves. They might have pressure from, if you're an MGA, you might have pressure from the broker side and the insurer side on they're trying to sort out the portfolio of impact that they have. And so it's really working out, where do I need to do things? Where's that going to make sure I'm compliant, make sure I'm attractive to the insurers to work with me and things like that. But also, where are my opportunities? Can I become a specialist underwriter for a new area? Or a climate technology or wind farms or something that is a growing space and therefore provide an opportunity. So there are lots of challenges. The resources to do these things the smaller firms don't have, but by being super targeted can perhaps work out where the opportunities are.
Like that. So it's figure out what your exposures are, and that kind of leads you to where your opportunities are, but also the wider piece of where should we be trying to get to, and what can we do to drive change in that direction. Gillie, and Mike, this question for you as well in your capacity as independent consultant. But first to you, Gillie, as the head of the ESG at a professional services businesses, what have you found easy or difficult in terms of aligning your ESG initiatives with your clients' needs in the sector?
Yeah, I mean, I think that alignment of client needs is what makes it easier. I nearly said easy then, and then I added on easier. I mean, prior to this, I was head of ESG for a US tech firm, and I think that we were still very much in the space of that this is a nice thing to do. Whereas, if you just spend a day looking at my inbox at the influx of client requirements, questions, assessments, contract obligations, RFPs, RFIs, like seeing that come in helps me then go straight to the board and say, what do you want to do about this? And then we work out how to implement it. And I think, it's always about how you pitch things, look at your audience, what are you trying to achieve? And, outside of work, I may have my own opinions, values, aims for the world and how I want to be going forward. But when I'm at work, my job is to make the business more viable and successful. And thankfully, I'd say that doing all of these things will have a commercial benefit. And I think that has been the key to driving things forward.
Yeah, to come in there, I think that's absolutely right, is sustainability, in order to gain the traction it needs to, absolutely has to be a positive impact on the bottom line. There will always be a range of client needs from we just want to tick the boxes and comply with the regs that we need to comply with. And so having a view of what those regs are, who they cover, and how that's going to impact the industry is important. All the way through to, we want to positively impact the planet. We're practicing a stakeholder model of business where we want to increase the bottom line, but we also want to increase our impact on our workforce, our customers, social impact on the world, as well as environmental impact on the world. You're always going to have that spread of clients who come to you with those different levels of ambition. And I think articulating the opportunity for the bottom line helps push them up that curve, because ultimately I think sustainability, people talk about AI and technology, and those are great growth enablers. Unless we can create a sustainable economy, growth will not be unending. And so the only real growth story for economies, but also for businesses of this century, is going to be a sustainable one. So it's working out how you identify the opportunities now that will mean that you are the winning insurer, broker, MGA, whatever, by 2050, 2070, etc.
Do you know what I find really interesting, right? So I said at the beginning, there's lots of buzzwords and tick boxes around sustainability. And it feels very much that, there's a lot of drivers behind pushing an agenda, whatever the agenda might be. There's lots of them out there. What do you do when you're mid-push, you think you're just starting to get some traction, and then the terminology changes? So now we're talking about responsible businesses. People are still going, right, I'm just a one-man band or a 5-person show, and I need an ESG policy. Oh, what is all this responsible business about? Like, how do you maintain the momentum, and what do you think the benefit of that change in terminology, if any, is? Mike?
So I think the terminology changes come from historical abuse of these terms. We're talking about greenwashing, right? We're talking about firms saying they're doing X because it's the buzzword, and then X almost becoming synonymous with that duplicity. So the reason I think these terms change is because the terms get politicized, they get turned into battlegrounds, cultural battlegrounds. And so then people try and think of new terms to soften the entry point for those discussions. And I think bit by bit, as the terms change, we had CSR, we've had ESG, we still have ESG. It's the basis for most corporate reporting globally. But firms starting to move away from saying we're doing ESG to things like responsible business. And I think that's all part of the kind of the bubble, the wrap around sustainability initiatives and how we get to engage our suppliers, our customers with it. I think people who are really trying to do sustainability are aware of that change, so they're trying to get the conversations to happen productively. But ultimately, the activities they're trying to do, we're trying to build businesses that can serve people and serve the environment in a way that means the economy will function indefinitely and not, we're moving from take, make, waste, linear economy where the earth can't support those resources into something more regenerative, more circular. Every single industry will be part of that change. And I think the terminology, yes, changes. And I think that's a marketing and a political problem. I think the activities are kind of the same, and people getting their head down and doing sustainability are doing those activities.
It's weird because how do you push an agenda? You make it political and you market it, and then it becomes a problem. Gillie, do you want to add to what Mike's?
Yeah, I mean it's frustrating, right? like there's no two ways about it. I couldn't agree more about the fact that it's become a political culture war. But like you said, we have to push it somehow. I mean, and I see it across the scope of ESG. I read an article this morning. I'm not going to mention the publication, but it was essentially pointing the finger, saying, rich white men are the biggest emitters of emissions. You're like, yeah, that's going to solve the problem. That's going to get the buy-in and change. And I think Larry Fink said it best in his recent letter in response to the landscape in the US, saying, call it what you want, we're still doing it, and whether you believe in climate change or not, we know fossil fuels are finite, so we have to transition away from them. So yeah, I think our approach is we are actually rebranding to responsible business, but I'm very much keeping that in the background. Like, our pillars don't change. We've always aligned with people, planet, and our purpose, which aligns with ESG, but it's still everything we're doing as a business, and our commitments aren't changing. So yeah, I mean, let's just get rid of the noise and get on with the work, I think.
That's my favourite quote. Get rid of the noise, get on with the work. Might be the name of this podcast. That could very well happen.
I love it.
So we've talked quite a lot about opportunity, challenge. Where does regulation fit in that? Because obviously we're a heavily regulated industry, and regulation presents both opportunity and challenge. Talk to me about your thoughts and feelings around that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's totally sitting in the middle, isn't it, of that challenge and opportunity. On the one hand, we see regulation coming in, and every time I hear about a new entity we're potentially buying in Europe, the CSRD alarm bells start going off. And on the other hand, you're like, this is great. There's more drive to do what we want to do. I think one of the most frustrating things is the time and cost we're spending on compliance with regulation is actually taking away from, the getting on with the work piece. But to be able to frame it to the business that what we're doing, is not only essential but can add value and highlight the risk as well. I would have to say I'm thankful for it, because otherwise I don't think we'd be able to do what we're doing. I just maybe don't think it's coming strong enough. We're in a position where, as Mike said, we have an opportunity as an industry to drive change. But it's hard for businesses to go ahead of regulation. And are we getting the right regulation? I'm not sure, when we're so busy trying to get data in line in various forms, when a united approach is we're crying out for.
You're smiling, Mike. I sense your agreement.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, regulation usually comes under a risk-based approach to sustainability, right? These are the things that will impact the business if we don't do them because we're legally required to. And so it's a priority maker. It's something that pushes whatever the regulation covers up the agenda. I think where the opportunity comes in is, particularly for the insurance industry, is spotting where regulation on other industries will create opportunities for insurance. So if you look at the EU bringing in extended producer liability, so anything companies make, so Apple, when they make all their iPads, send them off into the world, they are now going to become increasingly responsible for what happens with those products. If they're all ending up in landfill, that becomes a problem for the core manufacturer. It becomes a risk for the core manufacturer. And so for the insurance industry, that's obviously an opportunity. There are new products that could be developed there around that regulation. So it's not a regulation that will directly, Aviva aren't going to come around and say, oh, we've got to submit things for the EU extended producer responsibility, but they might spot an opportunity where that's going to impact other industries. So I think regulation is definitely a priority maker when it covers you, but it's an opportunity creator when you can spot where the trends are going.
Absolutely. So regulation, big topic. Another big topic that's relevant is new technologies, right? So we've all heard about the explosion in technologies and AI this and blah 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 blah. How are new technologies kind of emerging in this sector that are supporting sustainability or responsible businesses?
Well, I suppose I've sort of got two hats on when I think about technology. I've got we are reporting as a global business, technology in terms of how we gather data. There's a plethora of greenhouse gas emission tools out on the market which cost an absolute fortune, and sort of currently sitting in a position of, is that worth it? Could we spend that money better elsewhere? Is regulation going to pull together so we don't have to cut the data in 7 different ways? But I think the thing that's most interesting to me and the business, our exposure, our materiality, with 70% of our emissions sitting in our supply chain, it is what is that technology that is, deciding whether we repair versus replace, doing calculations over subsidence claims, what's the biggest carbon footprint over keeping the tree or replacing the tree, looking at commercial drying was a really interesting one for me, using the new technology to sit sensors in a property so we know when the property is dry, rather than someone having to go out and check it every 3 days and then maybe we've left it on too long. So there's those sort of small energy wastes. We're also working with a supplier that provides capsules, kitchen or bathroom capsules if there's been damage in a property, which is now solar panels, so people don't have to move out of the property, they can go and use that. So I think even though these things might seem small, that technology that builds up together is going to make a big impact to that supply chain issue, which is really hard to fix.
Yeah, 100%. I think the role of technology in all of our lives is obviously been exponentially increasing for many years and will continue to do so. I think exactly as Gillie described, there are different types of technology. So the kind of digital connection is one layer, and it's absolutely essential for the move to anything like a circular economy. We can't have, product passports tracking supply chains from farm to through complex processes all the way through to a final product if we don't have the data to track that process. So data and connected devices and sensors is going to be absolutely huge. I've been having a conversation recently about a hard tech company that have been developing water sensors because the UK waterways are massively under analysed and measured. So these kind of internet connected devices greatly increasing our data is massive. There's also the kind of, I guess, really hard climate tech solutions. So people out there developing better wind turbines or more efficient wind turbines or more efficient solar panels or solar panels that can be disassembled and reused at end of life. These are all the kind of, I guess, climate tech problems that we'll need to solve. And again, it's new areas for the insurance industry potentially. If you look at agriculture, the face of agriculture has changed massively over 100 years. In fact, I was listening to Farming Today this morning, and there was a guy who'd been he's been farming all his life, the past 50 years, and he said we used to have 20 horsepower tractors, and they're now 200 horsepower, and the machinery is massive, and all these changes, and they'll continue to change. Ag tech is such a massively growing sector of climate technology as we look towards increasing the health of soils and things, rather than just yield. We're looking at moving towards that regenerative model. And so climate tech generally will have a massive role to play. I think identifying the new areas that it's creating and how it changes insurance risk in those sectors. So how does agricultural risk change if you're a massive insurer of agriculture? What does that mean for your portfolio in terms of your modelling, but also in terms of the products you offer?
What's really coming across, right, is the level of expertise that you guys have in responsible business matters across a variety of industries. So, Gillie, you talked about supply chain. Mike, you're talking about agriculture and lots of different industries. You don't know what you don't know. And as a small business, this kind of stuff can just feel like, wow, so overfacing. Okay, so I'm going to try not to print things I don't need to print, and I've got recycling. I haven't got a budget to bring an ESG specialist in. And that actually is, I mean, we live in an economy where it's something ridiculous like 90% SMEs. So this is most of the economy driven by companies that don't have the big global horsepower to go and look and develop these technologies and understand what the bloody hell they're supposed to do. So how do we go about it? What do we do? How do we manage our own ESG responsibilities? But also, how do we keep up to date with the big wide world of technologies that are coming in that could potentially help us? Like, I only just learned about there is a fridge out there that can tell me when I'm running out of milk and order it. That's insane.
Wow.
And I'm sure people knew about that a really long time ago. But it's just when it's come into my sphere of knowledge. How do people do that? It's really difficult when you've got 1,001 things to do. What do we do?
But I'd start where we started, and you asking me what drives what I'm doing. It's the same thing. I mean, if you're a small supplier and you have clients, your existence is to providing that client with what they need. If suppliers called me up and said, we're a small company, we don't know what to do, what matters to you? It's essentially what I'm doing, just on a much smaller scale. What kind of things are you looking for? I don't think, bearing in mind we're responsible for the supply chain, there's only going to be a positive conversation there. And, we do provide for that. We're sending a number of suppliers on a net zero training this year. So, small companies who don't know what they're doing, like, we're willing to pay for them to go and get that education. So I'd say, like, as a tip, that's where you should start. Call up your clients and ask them, look at their ESG reports. They may have one on the website. What is their materiality? Because the likelihood is you will have the same. That would be a practical tip.
Yeah, I think I'd go with three main things. And the first very much builds on that materiality point. It's make it core. If you're the MD or if you're the finance director, sustainability should be part of your strategy for the organization. It should be part of those core discussions you're having about your 5-year plans that you're probably having anyway. So make it core. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Practice out in the open. Talk about what you're doing openly, not as a, oh, look at us marketing spiel, but as a, this is what we're trying. This didn't work. This did work. So make it core, make mistakes, and collaborate. Talk to your industry bodies, see what support they can offer. They should be helping those smaller companies in their networks to address these things. And there's help such as the training that can be delivered at scale that, one firm doesn't make the scale, but when you have those networks of multiple firms, it does. So collaboration through the industry, sustainability can be a competitive advantage, but it's also a absolute essential, or will be an absolute essential. And so working out in the open and actually moving as an industry, I think, is really important.
Okay, so we know how to figure out what our exposures are, look at whether it's a risk or an opportunity for your business, and then make it part of the core strategy and collaborate with others. I've forgotten what the middle one was, but I think it was don't make mistakes. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. What do you see, Mike, over the next 5 to 10 years in the insurance industry, specifically around sustainability and responsible businessing?
So I think we'll find the bigger insurers will come under more regs, and they will filter that out to the rest of the market who they work with, because increasingly sustainability doesn't care as much about scope 1 and 2, it cares about scope 3, which is your value chain. So anyone that supplies or anyone that you supply becomes part of your impact on the world, and so they will filter that out. We'll see massive transition in energy. You only have to look at where energy has been going in terms of price competitiveness of renewables. So the trends are there in different industries, so look out for what they are. But I think energy, agriculture are going to be huge changes over the next 5, 10, 15 years. I think that's probably the regs and the scope 3, I think will draw more and more people into this. And actually, there's nothing, as I said, regulation is a priority maker. So even if you're a tiny firm that has no resource, when all of your insurers come to you and say, we actually you need to comply with this, or you won't get any business from us, the resource will have to materialise in some way or another.
Yeah. Gillie?
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more on scope 3 being the focus, but I think I'm not going to give a holistic answer. I'm going to give a road bump. I see the lack of ability to meet commitments that have been made and the implementation of offsetting being a huge game changer. You know, a lot of people have made targets that are difficult. I think as we mature in our data reporting, some people are actually seeing uplift in their footprint because they're getting better at finding the data. And then we've got to think about the entirely unregulated market of offsetting. They're trying to convince your board to buy something that you're not really sure whether it's going to deliver or not, and it's very forward looking. And I think we will experience a shaky moment of, oh dear, what are we going to do? How are we going to fix this? And I think that's maybe just a question that we all need to keep in mind and start thinking about.
I'm learning a lot from you guys. I love podcasting. It is the best way to learn. I'd love you to leave the listeners with one key takeaway around the importance of sustainability in the insurance industry. Mike?
I'll go broad and narrow in. So I think it's something like 2 years ago, 9% of the world's economy was circular. Last year it was 7 or 8%. We're going backwards. And as we see more wildfires, more heavier intensity storms, the insurance industry will bear a lot of the brunt of that because it insures these things and it will be paying out the costs. So in order to move the world back up that circularity, in order to help us achieve net zero, those 4 things I mentioned around being an enabler, being an investor, policy and behavioural nudges, and looking at own operations, start doing that now, because it will impact your business, and you want to be ahead of the curve rather than behind it.
Yeah, no, I think I'll probably build on that and you know, redabble in that we haven't talked a lot about risk, but it's sort of been a thread throughout. And you know, when you're thinking about having conversations, particularly with underwriters, with syndicates, about, you know, short-term profit, long-term gain, and you know, often Lloyd's back syndicates offer a business plan of 1 year and we're talking about a 20-year reduction plan. I think I'd just be very aware of, you know, Mike's talked about uplift in climate activity, which is making a short-term profit for companies. But then, you know, we experienced insurance industries pulling out of jurisdictions like Florida because it just became too much. So, you know, I'd say be wary of that, what looks like gold, because actually it might provide a long-term risk. So maybe there is slightly a moral conversation to be had, which will eventually tie up with your bottom line.
You guys are awesome. I have really enjoyed talking to you. If you're happy, I'll put your details on the show notes, so anybody's got any questions they'd like to take up, or perhaps any advice, thoughts, that they can contact you directly, or as ever, contact me, because I'm always happy to podcast about stuff. And I just want to thank you both for your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks very much.
Thank you for tuning in to another enlightening episode of Changing the Conversation. If you enjoyed today's insights and want to stay connected with the latest industry trends, be sure to subscribe, rate and leave a review. Feel free to reach out to us on social media or through our website to share your thoughts and suggestions, or even to nominate someone whose contribution deserves to be heard. Until next time, this is Sarah Myerscough signing off from Changing the Conversation.